Shabbat Shalom. What a wonderful night this has been already. And it is a joy to have the opportunity to introduce Rabbi Gary Zola to all of you. May, this month, is Jewish American Heritage Month. President Biden's recent proclamation says that it honors the timeless traditions, heritages, and contributions of Jewish Americans that drive our progress as a nation each and every day. There is literally no better person to speak to what this month means and to reflect on Mount Zion's 165th anniversary than the man who chaired and organized the congressionally recognized National Commission for commemorating 350 years of American Jewish history. That was back in 2004 and 5, close to when Dr. Zola was last at Mount Zion, helping to kick off Mount Zion's sesquicentennial. Rabbi Zola is the executive director of the Jacob Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives and professor of the American Jewish Experience and Reformed Jewish History at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, where he was ordained as a rabbi in 1982 and earned his PhD in American Jewish History in 1991. By the way, the archives in Cincinnati are so worth a visit. They are the world's largest freestanding research center dedicated solely to the study of the American Jewish experience, and it is extraordinary to be there. It's like going to the Library of Congress. Rabbi Zola is a tireless advocate for telling stories of our past and an academic, producing books and scholarly articles, including his 2014 book. We called him Rabbi Abraham, Lincoln and the American Jewry. He is the first faculty member of HUCJR to be appointed to a standing commission of the United States government. President Obama appointed him to serve as a member of the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad, which fosters the preservation and protection of cemeteries, monuments, historic buildings associated with foreign heritage of United States citizens. And when I said tireless, I mean tireless, inspiring, energetic, engaging. His accomplishments go on. And I want to share a little bit more personally how Rabbi Zola, as recruitment director for Hebrew Union College, played an important role in my life and many others. I have here a letter I received from Dr. Zola in 1989, inviting me to Cincinnati campus for Back to the Sources, paging through our Jewish past, present, and future, with that same spirited signature. And he welcomed me to that school as someone who was a math physics major. And by the end of that weekend, I said, Rabbi, maybe. And speaking of letters, I want to just say that I also received a letter when I came to Mount Zion 25 years ago from the person sitting next to Rabbi Zola, which is Rabbi Norman Cohen, whom I quoted earlier in the annual meeting, and he is our colleague. And Rabbi Cohen, I'm grateful that you are here. He is the Rabbi Emeritus of Bet Shalom Congregation in Minnetonka. This visit of Dr. Zola to Mount Zion is in partnership with B'nai Israel Synagogue in Rochester, the first time we are doing such a partnership. I am so glad to work with Rabbi Michelle Warner and Brooks and Terry Edwards, who are here, who belong to both of our shuls. And this visit was made possible by a gift in memory of Brooks's parents, Dr. Jesse and Marjorie Edwards, longtime members of Mount Zion and centers of our community. May their memories be a blessing, and may their legacies be long-lasting. Gary, I'd like to invite you now to share your words.
Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's so nice to be back at Mount Zion. As Rabbi Spilker said, I was privileged to be here for your sesquicentennial event, and now 15 years later, for the 165th. I'm looking forward to an invitation to the 175th, and I have every expectation of being here for the 200th, and I look forward to seeing you. Now, friends, before I speak to you this evening on your anniversary, as any good clergy person, before I speak, I have something to say. And I just want to take a minute before launching into my prepared remarks to thank this congregation and the congregation in Rochester for inviting me. It's a privilege always to come into the communities. It's important for members of the faculty of our school to be with people. I found the annual meeting so interesting and inspiring. And I also think it's important for us to have an opportunity to share what we do in our learning with the community at large. I also know that we're being carried by live stream. Several people have indicated to me that they would be watching in live stream. I promised them, friends, all of you who are here, I promised them that I would, by name, say hello to each and every one. So consider, if I'm looking right now at the live stream, that I have fulfilled that obligation to all of you who are watching. I would like to just add one other word, and this may be the most important thing that I have to say this evening. And that is, it is really relatively a simple task for someone like myself to come into a pulpit to speak about a topic that I study and teach. It's the same topic wherever I go, the American Jewish experience. I happen to I have the good fortune of sitting on top of the largest catalog collection of documentary evidence on the history of the American Jew. And for heaven's sakes, I don't even have to go into the archives. I can have someone bring me whatever I need. And then to come in and speak and teach and leave. The real challenge and the real heroes of the American Jewish experience, in fact, of Jewish life altogether, are my colleagues who are here, our rabbis and our cantors, our religious leaders. Think about it, friends. They cannot get up in the pulpit every single week and repeat a similar story from what they delivered last week. And they have to, every year, especially after being in a pulpit for 25 years, renew themselves so that they can renew you. And they're with you at your high times, your wonderful times, your special times, and sad times. All the words about community today that were spoken, they're so true. So I want to salute the brilliance of the founder of the Hebrew Union College, Isaac Mayer Wise, who recognized that if the American Jewish community did not raise up its own religious leaders, then the American Jewish community could have little hope for its future. That we could not depend upon Europe or other parts of the world to send us people, that we had to be, to create our own autochthonous, our own indigenous religious leaders who understood this culture and understood our community and understood the context. And that's what's been happening at the Hebrew Union College for almost a century and a half. So to Rabbi Spilker, Cantor Spilker, who has the rabbi confessed, I've known since the 80s. And to see you two receive your Doctor of Divinity degree and to see what's really you've achieved over these years, it's so wonderful. And I want to extend that same recognition and salute to Rabbi Adler and to Cantor Strauss-Klein. We really need to never forget and never lose focus on how very important it is. Never take them for granted. And Rabbi Cohen, my teacher, it's so nice to have you here too. You know how much you mean to me and how much I love you. Now, friends, perhaps you've heard that the good folks at the Butterball Turkey Company offer a public hotline that is every Thanksgiving so that all of us can ask turkey-related questions or problems that they may be having with their turkey in advance of the Thanksgiving tumult. I heard a story this past year that a woman called to inquire as to whether it would be safe to prepare a turkey that she had been keeping in her freezer for 23 years. The hotline operator told the woman that her turkey might be safe if her freezer had been kept below 0 degrees Fahrenheit for the entire 23 years. But the operator went on to point out that even if the lady's turkey was literally safe to eat, the bird's flavor had likely deteriorated significantly, and therefore she would not recommend serving it. The caller happily thanked the operator for her advice and said, "That's exactly what I assumed," she chirped. "So we'll just bring the turkey over to our temple. I'm sure they'll put it to good use." Now, this story is hopefully a humorous illustration of our collective assumption that temples and synagogues are capable of addressing all our needs, spiritual, educational, and, in this case, culinary. No matter what the challenge, our synagogues are there to stand forever as our spiritual powerhouses. Yet, it is hazardous, as I was saying earlier, to take our spiritual homes for granted. For synagogues and Jewish institutions in general, especially in America, for them to thrive and to survive, to wax and wane, that happens in direct response, always, to the efforts of men and women, members of the Jewish community, just like you, who dedicate themselves to one degree or another to the perpetuation of Jewish communal life, and certainly to the synagogue. Now, the history of Mount Zion illustrates this idea because the congregation has a well-documented heritage that's filled with examples of men and women who chose freely to respond to the incessant flow of challenges that have confronted their community, and our forebears over the decades. Now, as we gaze around this famous sanctuary, we have to recognize, don't we, that we are the intellectual, spiritual, and material benefactors of a magnificent heritage. Think about it. Could the founders of Mount Zion in the year 1856, 165 plus years ago, could they have imagined this congregation? It's hard to believe this flourishing synagogue sprouted from such a simple, unadored seedling as it did in 1856. So this evening, let's briefly offer up just a few examples of men and women, just a few, all members of this historic congregation who influenced and contributed to the upbuilding of the congregation and Jewish life in Minnesota, and truly in the nation as a whole. Remember that although these names are real people and they're just case studies, don't forget that they are exemplars. They fulfill the model of a much larger pattern, a trend that has genuine historical significance. For there are countless examples of people who illustrate this, what I call profiles in American Jewish courage. Now, the first profile to focus on this evening is that of Rabbi Judah Wexler, one of several little-known, largely unheralded, pioneering champions of Reform Judaism in the United States. Rabbi Wexler was one of this congregation's truly most extraordinary spiritual leaders. Born in Bavaria, Wexler trained under Rabbi Seligman Bamberger. Bamberger, was a very prominent Orthodox rabbi who established a traditionalist seminary in Würzburg. But shortly after finishing his seminary training in the year 1857, and that was very, very early for a diplomaed rabbi to come to America, Wexler came, probably was one of the first 20 diplomaed rabbis in this country. Wexler served a whole array of congregations before coming to Mount Zion in 1882. Not because he was a failure, to the contrary, he was very successful. And whenever he was offered a higher salary, he moved to a new community. In fact, in writing to the president of Mount Zion, a man by the name of Solomon Bergman, that letter has survived. It is in the archives. And Wexler notes in that letter that he would consider becoming a candidate for this pulpit if the congregation was willing to ante up a larger, more appropriate salary than the one that had been advertised. Wexler promised Mr. Bergman that, quote, if our meeting together should result in an election, of which I have not the least doubt, I shall earnestly strive of making your congregation one of the most flourishing in the West. Well, indeed, the congregation really did flourish under his leadership. In fact, he not only built up the religious school, not only did he enhance the musical character of the congregation, the worship service. In one of his most noteworthy but overlooked achievements, he launched a range of interfaith activities that earned the respect of this congregation and the general St. Paul community. He was personally involved in benevolent and social welfare causes that went way beyond the confines of the synagogue. He participated in cultural pulpit exchanges and cultural initiatives. And a decade before the adoption of the Pittsburgh Platform's famous declaration asserting that Reform Jews were morally obligated to address, on the basis of justice and righteousness, the problems presented by the contrasts and evils in the present organization of society, Wexler was already doing that. He was here when the very first building was built for the congregation, and he deserves special recognition for two causes that entitle him to be dubbed a Mount Zion profile of Jewish courage. First, this rabbi, remember a Bavarian, a Central European, was among the very first Jews in this entire area to assume the heavy responsibility of helping and supporting the Eastern European Jews when they began to flow into America. This would be in the early 1880s. Although, as we all know, the large metropolitan areas such as New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, they received mass numbers of Eastern European immigrants, St. Paul was also being inundated, albeit, of course, on a smaller scale. But by the spring of 1882, which was really just the very beginning of the big migration wave, more than 200 refugees from Eastern Europe, Jewish refugees, that's what they called them, were already in St. Paul. And Wexler inspired his congregation immediately. A congregation, by the way, that probably had 50 paying members, to raise emergency funds and to spend the congregation's, and I quote, last cent, if necessary, in order to help our brothers and our sisters. Wexler's most remarkable project, as some may know, was an agricultural collective called Painted Woods. This was located in Dakota, which we now would refer to as North Dakota. I don't have time this evening to detail how he did this, but he, through sheer force of personality, created an agricultural settlement for these Eastern European Jews to go and learn how to become farmers and to support themselves and so forth. Unfortunately, the settlement was not able to sustain itself all that long, but not because of any failure on the part of Mount Zion or even on the part of Wexler. The congregation, under his urging, raised thousands of dollars to help these Jews and help them get settled in this settlement. But it was droughts and fires and failed crops, an endless series of misfortunes that finally sentenced the project to doom after about a half a dozen years. Now, Rabbi Wexler was heartbroken by this failure. He put his whole soul into it, and he asked his people to give until it hurt, and they did. And although they were not angry at the rabbi, he was so despondent and felt so discouraged, he resigned from this pulpit and accepted a pulpit in Meridian, Mississippi. Yet Wexler's motives were heroic and his commitment was courageous. At the very height of this effort to keep the settlement going, he wrote these words in an article that appeared in the American Israelite. I quote, "The fact remains," Wexler wrote, "that Eastern European refugees are among us. They are our kindred, and it is our duty to elevate them to a higher place so they can become good citizens of this country. Let nobody argue," he continued, "that we are not interested in their welfare. For what enables one Israelite to elevate the other, what enables one Israelite, he wrote, elevates the other, and what degrades one Israelite lowers in the same degree the standing of the other." Just one quick postscript on Wexler. After he left St. Paul, as I said, he went to Meridian, Mississippi, where he also distinguished himself. That's a whole nother story. There, he fought relentlessly, believe it or not, on behalf of public education. And although many citizens in Meridian did not want public education in the Jim Crow South to be extended to the black community and to black children, it was your Rabbi Wexler who led the charge in Meridian organized a public referendum, ultimately getting it passed by the community, and he is responsible for the erection of the very first all-brick school building built for black children, public education in Mississippi. It is said that Rabbi Wexler himself donated $1,000. I went on the computer and checked. That would be close to $32,000 today to that cause. And you can go online tonight and look up the Wexler School. It is still in existence, no longer a public school, but is still a cultural center in Mississippi. This is a building that carries the name of your rabbi, Judah Wexler. A second entrant for consideration as one of the congregation's profiles in American Jewish courage would be a woman by the name of Sophie Worth. Now, before touching briefly on Sophie Worth's very remarkable career, it should be noted that one of the distinguishing and unique features of the entire American Jewish experience is the extraordinary role that women have played in the shaping of Jewish life in this country. The role and the impact that American Jewish women have had on synagogues, on benevolent societies, on educational institutions, on cultural institutions, organizational initiatives. No other diaspora has been so affected by women, Jewish women, as has the American Jewish experience. It is impossible, friends, to overstate the importance of women leaders, and despite the imposing societal obstacles they faced, they forged new paths that have always enlarged and renewed Jewish life in America. And the women of Mount Zion constitute an inspiring case study of this phenomenon. We could easily devote a whole weekend of study to the courageous women of this congregation and of this community who faced down difficulties over the past 165 years. During the first 25 years alone, some of this congregation's most dynamic female figures were so impactful on the success of this congregation. The accomplishments that they achieved, when you read about it, is absolutely daunting, and yet, during that period, they were not ever permitted to serve on a board of trustees of the congregation. For example, there was Amelia Ullman. She and her husband, as people are shaking their heads, know the name. They were founders of this congregation. There's much to say about Amelia, but the interesting thing is she and her husband left the community after a while. They went to other places, but she never lost her connection to this congregation. In fact, it's noted in the documents that in 1887, long after she left St. Paul, Amelia sent Mount Zion a brand new Torah scroll. And that was not any less expensive then than it is today, along with a special velvet pulpit cover for the new building that had just been erected. Another name that could be mentioned is Hannah Austrian, another one of the founders of the congregation. She was one of the key founders of what was called then the Ladies' Benevolent Society at Mount Zion. And that is a forerunner of sisterhood, or a forerunner of the women of Mount Zion. Now, those minutes from those early years have survived, and those minutes are fascinating. They testify to all the good things that these women were doing. Listen to the nobility of their activities. First, they purchased firewood and groceries for people in need. Second, they helped new immigrants to obtain peddling license. They steered them through the bureaucracy so that these people could go out and peddle and earn a living. 3, they paid for medical care for those who couldn't afford it. No medical insurance, no Medicare. 4th, they raised money to give to families that found themselves destitute. The death of a of a father, someone who was the money earner. They founded and funded the cost of putting orphans, Jewish orphans, into orphanages. They paid for funeral expenses, and they bought people simple needs: spectacles, sewing machines, sometimes even train tickets so they could visit relatives. And these women, believe it or not, in the records it says they actually purchased a glass eye for one particularly unfortunate co-religionist. Now, Sophie Worth is one of those remarkable women. As I said, she was one of the founders, key figures in the Ladies' Hebrew Benevolent Society here at Mount Zion. And when the Eastern European Jews came to this country in large numbers, Worth spearheaded the creation of an institution that I was so happy to read about, is still in the booklet that came from your annual meeting that I'm going to take back to the archives. The neighborhood house, at that time called the West Side Neighborhood House, where refugees could attain a range of services and social support. And then after a few years of success, the congregation really started this and launched it. Then the Jewish founders of the neighborhood house decided they wanted it to be a non-sectarian institution, and they invited representatives from other parts of the community, Protestants and Catholics, to join the board, and so forth and so on. And I was so meaningful to read about the continuous generosity that is carried on until this day. Well, friends, my time is almost up. There's just one short final profile of American Jewish courage that I have to mention this evening. And this one you may never have heard of, but she was a member of this congregation. And that profile is the profile of a young girl by the name of Lily Belchner. Lily Belchner. Now, the details of Lily's life are completely lost in the mist of history. She appears, to the best of my knowledge, only once in all the annals of Mount Zion's history. And although we really do not know what became of little Miss Lily Belchner, the words she spoke at the dedication of your first building on the afternoon of August 25th, 1882, have survived. When Mount Zion's beautiful new building, which was at the time located on Minnesota and 10th Streets, was formally dedicated, the guest orator was not a redheaded rabbi. It was Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise, the founder of the Hebrew Union College. He came all the way to St. Paul to speak. There was also a whole eloquence of rabbis who spoke that evening. Rabbi Emeritus Emanuel Hess, Rabbi Wexler, the rabbi at the time, even Rabbi Henry Elioizi of Temple Israel came to celebrate the erection of the building. But it was Lily Belchner who was asked to present the key to the building to the president of the congregation, and she impressed Isaac Mayer Wise so profoundly that he replicated all of her words in the American Israelite, and this is what she said. Mr. President, a most pleasing duty devolves upon me, that of presenting to you the key of our new temple, with the kind request that it may be the means of opening its doors for divine worship on Sabbath after Sabbath and holiday after holiday, to render praise and thanks to the great I Am. We have long anticipated this day. And in the language of the psalmist, we exclaim, "This day the Lord has made. Come, let us rejoice and be glad in it." All honor to this congregation, which has undertaken the erection of this beautiful temple. The all-wise providence has signally blessed this great enterprise. We hope that with the dedication of our new temple, a new era will dawn for this congregation. May it be one of progress, of enlightenment, and of harbinger of goodwill to one and all. May the congregation ever be grateful and remember the many tokens of kindness which have been received from our friends and our neighbors, irrespective of party or religion. Representing here the rising generation of Israel, I represent its feeling in saying that we will endeavor to bear the banner of our sacred religion as proudly as our sires have done, and we will never surrender it, come weal or woe. To raise Judaism to the lofty pinnacle of glory shall be our highest aim. And now, Mr. President, receive from me this key to open the portals of our temple. Friends, the opening verse of our portion this week, Emor, goes like this. Emor el hakohanim b'nei Aharon ve'amarta alehem. In English, that means, say to the Kohanim, to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and tell them. And Rashi, in his commentary on this verse, asks a very simple question. Why does the Torah repeat itself by saying, Emor el hakohanim, speak, talk to the Kohanim, ve'amarta alehem, and say to them? Why the repetition of the phrase, tell them, speak to them? And Rashi answers his own question. He says, the first tell is for the current generation of Kohanim, and the second tell is directed towards the next generation. Friends, our Reform Jewish heritage never has abandoned the conviction that we Jews, all of us, should think of ourselves as Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, a nation of priests and a sacramental people. So as we together commemorate 165 years of history at Mount Zion, you are among the big boys. Let all of us, the present generation and the future generations, internalize little Miss Lily Belchner's words. Let us resolve to endeavor to bear the banner of our sacred religion as proudly as our sires have done, and to never surrender it, come weal or woe, to raise Judaism and the Jewish people to the lofty pinnacle of glory. This should be our highest aim as a sacred community. Remember, it was the brilliant German writer and philosopher Goethe who put these words in the mouth of his melancholy hero, Faust. When Faust says, "What you have inherited from your forebears, you must earn for yourself before you can make it your own. Once we consider and internalize this admonition, we cannot help but acknowledge that many years from now, when others are standing here and taking our place, when other scholars are looking into the American Jewish archives, they will be assessing our generation. So let us internalize that message, one of the great touchstones of our sacred tradition and writings. Let us chadesh yamenu kikedem. Let our days always be worthy of our forebears. And as I like to always say, it was Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, who said this message so succinctly and so masterfully and beautifully in a different context, but it has the same meaning when he taught, we Jews must never, never live in the past, but the past must always live in us. Shabbat Shalom and Mazal Tov to the congregation.